The morning began like any other for Captain Alyssa Hart, though she didn't know it would become the day that defined her name in every American newsroom for weeks. At 38, she had logged more hours in the sky than most pilots double her age. The cockpit wasn't just her workplace. It was the one place on Earth where her pulse actually slowed, where her thoughts moved with clarity, where she felt that rare sensation humans chase all their lives: control. She stepped onto the jet bridge of North Star Flight 219 with her usual stride, calm, efficient, focused. Her navy blue uniform was crisp, her hair pinned back in a disciplined twist, her captain's wings gleaming under the fluorescent terminal lights. Behind her dark green eyes lived a quiet intensity that other pilots noticed but never questioned. The Boeing 737 waited for her like an old friend. It smelled faintly of aviation fuel and cool metal, a scent that felt like home. Her co-pilot, Evan Briggs, was already seated at the controls when she entered the cockpit. 29, sharp-minded, still carrying the nervous energy of a young pilot eager to prove himself. He looked up and smiled in that tight way people do when they're trying not to look overly excited. "Morning, Captain." "Morning," she replied, settling into her seat. "How's our girl looking today?" "All systems nominal, weather corridors open, should be a smooth one." She nodded, glancing over the instrument panel, eyes scanning switches, displays, gauges, years of training compressed into seconds of instinctual assessment. Everything looked exactly as it should. For now. They pushed back from the gate at 9:47 a.m. The engines hummed to life, beginning their steady roar. As the aircraft rolled down the runway, the vibrations traveled up through the cockpit floor, a sensation Alyssa had always found grounding. She pulled back gently on the yoke. And just like that, they were airborne. The ascent was beautiful. Winter clouds hung low, but above them the sky was a bright, icy blue. Sunlight burst through in golden streaks. From the cockpit, Denver shrank into a patchwork of neighborhoods, roads, and frozen rooftops. Alyssa allowed herself a small, rare smile. She wasn't sentimental, but flying still moved her in ways she could never fully express. The world from 29,000 feet was quieter, softer, honest. About an hour into the flight, everything felt perfectly ordinary. The flight attendants rolled carts down the aisle. Passengers leaned back into movies or napped. Evan chatted cheerfully about the new simulator updates. Alyssa listened with half an ear, but her attention stayed on the sky. It was too calm. A pilot knows the sky the way a sailor knows the ocean, and something in the air felt different, almost electric. Then, a crackle on the radio. "North Star 219, be advised. 2 military aircraft are entering your airspace for scheduled training maneuvers. Maintain current heading." Alyssa responded professionally, but a subtle tension formed in her jaw. A-18 Super Hornets were common in the Denver training corridor. She had seen them slicing through the sky on dozens of flights, sleek, powerful, aggressive. Beautiful machines, but unpredictable during certain drills. Most days they stayed miles away. Today, she didn't like how quiet they were. "Everything okay?" Evan asked, noticing her silence. "I don't know," she answered honestly, "just listening." The sky had a tone pilots recognized, a hum, barely perceptible, that told them the airspace around them was shifting. Sometimes it meant nothing. Sometimes it meant everything. Alyssa leaned forward slightly, scanning the horizon. Then the world erupted. A violent boom split the air. Not thunder, not turbulence. A mechanical blast that shook the cockpit like a giant fist had slammed into the aircraft. The Boeing jerked sideways. Evan grabbed the overhead panel to steady himself. Alyssa held the controls firm as the jet shuddered violently. "What the?" Evan stuttered. Passengers screamed from the cabin behind them. Items clattered. A baby wailed. The fasten seatbelt sign chimed automatically. Another flash. Metal. A streak of gray and navy passed the cockpit window, an A-18 Super Hornet spiraling through the sky, trailing thick black smoke. Its engines coughed, sputtered, then exploded again with a second concussive blast. Alyssa's blood ran cold. "Jesus, dual engine failure," she murmured. The fighter jet was spinning out of control, its nose dipping erratically, the pilot fighting against physics and gravity. Evan's eyes widened. Is he coming toward us? Before Alyssa could answer, alarms screamed inside their cockpit. Proximity warnings flashed red on the display. The fighter jet was losing altitude fast and drifting directly into their path. The radio crackled. "North Star 219. This is Hornet Bravo 1. Controls failing. Hydraulics gone. I can't stabilize. Requesting assist. Anyone, please." Alyssa felt a chill climb her spine. She had never heard a military pilot sound afraid. "Evan," she said, voice low and steady, "get eyes on him." He's spinning, Captain. Less than half a mile, smoke everywhere." The fighter dropped another 100 feet, then another. It was coming too close, far too close. If it slammed into them at this altitude, both aircraft would disintegrate. Alyssa reacted instantly. "Left bank, do it now." Evan complied. The Boeing tilted sharply, passengers shrieking as gravity shifted. But the A-18 followed their trajectory, unintentionally, falling in their direction like a dying comet. Alyssa forced her voice into the radio. "Hornet Bravo 1, this is North Star 219. Do you have any steering at all?" "Static. Crackling. Then." "Negative, negative, engines dead, controls dead. If I eject now, jet falls uncontrollable, might hit houses, cars, God." Alyssa understood. If he bilated out, the fighter could plummet into a populated area below. Hundreds on the ground could die. And if he didn't bail, he could collide with them. 200 passengers. Her crew. Her responsibility. Her heartbeat slowed into something eerily calm. "Evan," she said softly, "we can't leave him." Evan's voice broke. "Captain, we can't escort a failing fighter jet in a commercial airliner." She turned her head, met his eyes. "If we don't help him, we may watch an entire neighborhood die." Silence. Then Evan swallowed and nodded. "What do you need?" Alyssa angled their aircraft downward, carefully matching the fighter's descent, just close enough to stabilize its wind path, but not so close that the dying engines would pull them into a vortex. The Boeing bucked violently, oxygen masks dropped, the cabin lights flickered, a drink cart slammed into the aisle. Alyssa lifted the intercom. "This is your captain. Everyone remain seated. This is an unexpected maneuver, but we are fully in control." But she wasn't sure they were. The fighter suddenly dipped again, hundreds of feet in seconds. Alyssa pushed her jet lower. For a moment, an impossible, terrifying moment, both aircraft fell together, a synchronized freefall. Then the stall alarm erupted inside the cockpit. Evan's face went white. "Captain, we're losing lift." Alyssa already knew. The fighter jet wasn't just falling anymore. It was pulling them with it. And the ground was coming fast. Alyssa gripped the controls, jaw clenched, eyes fierce. She had one chance. But not much time left. The stall warning pierced the cockpit like a razor. Flashing red lights lit up the instrument panel. The vibrating alarm wasn't just loud, it was accusatory, as though the aircraft itself was begging Alyssa to stop doing what she was doing. But she didn't stop. She pushed the nose down another fraction of a degree, fighting to keep the Boeing in smooth airflow as it followed the dying fighter's forced descent. Her heartbeat was steady, unnaturally steady, as if her body had gone into some primal, survival-focused clarity that only pilots who had faced death in the sky would recognize. "Captain," Evan's voice cracked as he stared at the altimeter, which was dropping faster than it ever should. "If we go any lower at this rate, we won't have room to recover." "We will," she replied, though part of her wondered if she believed herself. "Hold your focus." Outside the cockpit windows, the world tilted. The A-18 Super Hornet was spiraling in front of them, its once powerful dual engines now nothing but gaping, silent mouths leaking smoke. The fighter jet's wings shuddered violently, jerking like the limbs of a dying animal. It dipped left, then right, then fell into a tumble that threatened to take them both into chaos. Alyssa knew what she was attempting was the kind of thing pilots discussed in late-night simulator rooms as an impossible what-if scenario. A commercial jet guiding a failing fighter. It sounded absurd. Yet here they were. Evan rechecked their distance. 200 feet separation. He drops again, we collide. Alyssa's grip tightened. He's been trying to stabilize. If he can keep his nose up just 10 more seconds, just 10. Another alarm blared. Overspeed. The Boeing was accelerating in the fall, its weight pulling it faster than the fighter could manage. Passengers screamed behind them. Raw fear. Not the brief shouts of turbulence, but the primal kind that meant they believed something catastrophic was happening. A flight attendant burst into the cockpit, her face pale. "Captain, people are panicking, oxygen masks dropped." "Back to your jump seat," Alyssa ordered gently but firmly. "Strap in tight, trust me." The door closed. Evan swallowed hard. "Captain, are we even still escorting him, or is he dragging us?" Alyssa didn't answer right away. Because she wasn't sure. The fighter dipped again, shockingly fast. And this time it didn't level. It was falling. Hard. "Oh God," Evan whispered. "He's in a full aerodynamic stall." Alyssa forced her breathing slow, deliberate. "We stay with him, but we don't follow him into the ground." Her hands moved over the controls, adjusting subtle angles of pitch and power. The Boeing vibrated violently, shaking as though the sky itself wanted to tear it apart. The radio crackled again. "Hornet Bravo 1 to North Star. I'm losing consciousness. No air pressure systems failing. Can't." A cough. A choked gasp. Then silence. "Pilot might be hypoxic," Evan muttered. "He could black out any second." Alyssa knew. She also knew what that meant. If the fighter pilot lost consciousness, the aircraft would enter a death spiral that no amount of escorting, gliding, or guiding could counter. The fighter suddenly rolled, completely, doing a full 360-degree tumble. Passengers shrieked as the Boeing jerked in response. Alyssa countered the motion with instinctual precision, preventing her own aircraft from losing aerodynamic stability. But the fighter was no longer descending in a controlled fall. It was plummeting. "Vast altitude?" she asked. 20,000, Evan said, dropping like a stone. If the fighter reached 10,000 feet in that condition, it was over. At that altitude, recovery was almost impossible, especially for a pilot who might already be unconscious. "North Star 219, a new voice broke in, sharp and urgent. "Air traffic control. We see your trajectory. What the hell are you doing? You're descending far too fast." Alyssa pressed the transmit button, her voice startlingly calm. "Hornet Bravo 1 has dual-engine failure and no hydraulics. He's losing consciousness. Doesn't have altitude to glide. If he crashes uncontrolled, it'll hit populated terrain." Dead silence. Then ATC responded, voice shaken. "Captain Hart, what do you intend?" "Saving him," she said, "and keeping this jet out of the ground." Static, then a barely audible Godspeed. The fighter suddenly leveled, abruptly, unnaturally, and Alyssa's breath caught. "Did he regain control?" Evan breathed. "No," Alyssa said. "Look at his stabilizers. They're locked." She leaned forward, eyes sharpening. He triggered emergency backup systems. He's on last resort manual reversion. That gave them seconds, maybe. The fighter held level for about 3 heartbeats. Then plunged. Again. Harder. Altitude 15,000, Evan shouted. The ground was no longer theoretical, no longer distant. Mountain contours sharpened. Sunlight reflected off snow-covered ridges. Cars appeared as tiny moving flecks far below. He's going to hit terrain, Evan yelled. We can't keep following. Alyssa didn't have time to reassure him. Didn't have time to comfort the terrified flight crew. Didn't have time to think about the 200 passengers who trusted her. She had one calculation. One. Where would the fighter crash if she let go now? She traced its trajectory mentally, a line of death drawn across the terrain. And she saw it. A town. An entire middle school campus directly in the falling path. Her stomach twisted. No, she whispered. Then louder. Not today. She pushed the Boeing into a steeper angle for just a moment, enough to catch the fighter's unstable wake and force its fall into a narrower descent corridor. The maneuver slammed them with G-forces. Evan grunted, knuckles white. The aircraft shuddered like it would rip apart. You're insane, he gasped. Fly the plane, Evan. The fighter's plunge shifted by barely a degree, but that degree meant everything. It moved the crash line away from the school. Alyssa knew, the instant she had saved hundreds of kids she would never meet. But she also knew something else. Altitude 10,000, Evan shouted. The fighter was now too close to the ground to recover. And North Star 219 was right behind it, too low, too fast, too unstable. They needed to pull out. Now. Captain, we won't make it in time, Evan whispered. Alyssa's jaw tightened. Her hands steadied on the controls. She stared at the rapidly approaching terrain, white mountains, dark valleys, a ribbon of highway. And she saw their margin disappearing. It hit her with brutal clarity. She had run out of sky. The fighter dropped below them, vanishing under the nose of the Boeing. ATC screamed over the radio. North Star 219, pull up, pull up, pull up. But Alyssa already knew. If she pulled up too sharply, the plane would stall. If she didn't pull up, they'd hit the earth. 200 lives behind her. The unconscious pilot below her. The ground rising to meet them. Alyssa exhaled once slow, steady. Then, she pushed forward on the throttle. Evan's eyes snapped wide. Captain, what are you doing? Alyssa didn't answer, because she wasn't sure this would save them. But she knew one thing with absolute certainty. It was the only move left. When Alyssa slammed the throttles forward, the Boeing surged with a violent roar, engines straining as if they themselves understood the stakes. It was a maneuver no commercial pilot was ever trained or encouraged to attempt at this altitude. Throttle forward during a low-altitude descent. It bordered on madness. But Alyssa wasn't acting out of instinct alone. She was acting out of calculation. If she didn't add power now, the Boeing would strike the turbulence wake of the falling fighter jet and stall beyond recovery. The sudden thrust punched the aircraft forward, forcing a narrow corridor of airflow under the wings. Come on, she whispered. Hold together, just hold. The aircraft shook as if trying to break free from her command. Panels rattled. A deep, rumbling groan traveled through the fuselage. Evan stared at her in disbelief. Captain, this isn't going to work. This isn't. It will, she said sharply, or we die. The bluntness stunned him into silence. Below them the landscape rushed upward. Snow-dusted mountains, jagged cliffs, dark forests, the sun glinting cruelly off frozen lakes. Too close, far too close. The fighter jet dropped under their nose, briefly visible again, the lonely shape of a machine built for war, now powerless and limp, carried downward by nothing but gravity. Its canopy was frosted over. The pilot wasn't moving. "Altitude," Alyssa demanded. Evan's voice shook. 7,600, descending rapidly. Too low for any standard recovery. Too low for hesitation. Too low for anything other than miracle-level piloting. "ATC is calling again," Evan said, but neither of them reached for the radio. Nothing ATC said could possibly help them now. The Boeing reached the fighter's wake turbulence, the chaotic, spiraling wind left behind by its fall. The entire aircraft lurched. Alyssa felt it instantly in her bones, the shift in pressure, the sudden loss of lift, the jerk of unstable air that every pilot feared. "We're in his wash," Evan yelled. "Brace," Alyssa barked. The Boeing dropped violently, hundreds of feet, like a stone kicked off a cliff. Passengers screamed. Someone shouted a prayer. The overhead bins rattled so hard one popped open and suitcases spilled into the aisle. A flight attendant's voice crackled over the intercom, crying, "We're falling." But Alyssa's voice cut through, strong and unwavering. "No, we're not." She forced the Boeing's nose slightly down, then up, precise, deliberate movements, feeling every tremble of the aircraft as she fought to slice cleanly through the turbulence. The plane shuddered again, once, twice, then broke free. Evan stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. "Captain, how did you—" "Focus," she snapped back, her eyes never leaving the instruments. He jerked awake, his training taking over as they stabilized for 3 precious seconds. Then the altimeter screamed again. 6,000 feet. Too low. Too fast. Not enough sky left. Alyssa felt the cold rush of realization. Saving the fighter pilot had cost them their altitude cushion. They had perhaps 15 seconds before the terrain would claim them. The mountains outside the cockpit were no longer distant. They filled the entire front window, white ridges rising like walls. If this were a simulator, this was the moment the screen would fade black. But this wasn't a simulator. This was 200 human souls, and a fighter pilot slowly dying below them. Evan's voice trembled. "Captain, recommendations." Alyssa's mind raced, the cockpit lights reflecting in her eyes like fragments of fire. Every option flashed through her head. Sharp pull-up, too fast would stall. Side bank to avoid terrain. Mountain walls blocked both sides. Throttle cut, suicide. Throttle max, might overshoot and tear the wings off. Speed brake, could destabilize them prematurely. Bounce off a thermal, unpredictable. Then, a thought. Not a maneuver. A memory. Her father's voice, calm, wise. "Sometimes altitude is what saves you, Alyssa. Sometimes it's attitude." And she knew. She slammed the switch. Speed brakes half deploy. Evan's eyes went wide. "Half at this speed, if they catch too much air." "They won't," she said, "if you trust me." He swallowed hard, then hit the controls. The speed brakes deployed, panels on the wings lifting like gills, catching the air in a delicate balance between drag and stability. The aircraft jerked hard, but the descent slowed. Not much, but enough. 5,000 feet. 4,800. 4,700. Their rate of descent decreased, barely, but in aviation, barely could still mean the difference between living and dying. Alyssa tightened her grip. Evan set flaps to 15. "At this speed, that will rip." "Do it." He did. The flaps extended. The Boeing bucked again, groaning, protesting violently, panels whistling so loudly it sounded like the plane was screaming. But then, the aircraft began to float. Just slightly. Just enough. Alyssa seized the moment. Throttle steady. Pitch 2 degrees up. Hold it, hold it. The mountains scraped closer, filling every inch of the window. 3,000 feet. They were clearing the first ridge by what looked like inches. The shadow of the mountain washed over the cockpit, cold and ominous. The fighter dropped below them again, tumbling into the valley between two ridges. Alyssa had seconds. She pulled up, steady, measured, refusing the instinct to yank back too sharply. The Boeing curved, scraping past the ridge like a bird brushing treetops. A collective gasp erupted throughout the cabin as the aircraft rose back into breathable space. Evan exhaled a sob. "We made." "Don't finish that sentence," Alyssa cut in, voice razor-sharp. "Not yet." Because something wasn't right. Her hands felt it before her eyes confirmed it. The aircraft's nose wasn't rising smoothly. The yoke tremored. The airspeed indicator flickered. Then she understood. "Evan, did we take damage in the turbulence?" He checked the readings, his face paled. "Left stabilizer is fluctuating, something's bent." A single word left her mouth. "Damn." The fighter appeared again, farther down the valley, no longer in controlled descent but spinning, dying. "We can't keep following him," Evan said, voice ragged. "Not with damage, not at this altitude." "We don't have to follow him," she replied quietly. Evan frowned. "Then what are we doing?" She didn't answer. Because she was too busy performing a calculation, faster than most people could perform a sentence. Terrain, altitude, airspeed, wind direction, rate of descent, angle of approach, fighter trajectory, their damage. Her brain stitched the numbers together like a machine. And the conclusion made her stomach tighten. "We're going to lose him," Evan whispered, "aren't we?" Alyssa's jaw clenched. "No." And then she said something she had never said before in her entire career. "Evan, take the controls." He froze. "What, Captain?" "Take the plane, Evan." "But you've been flying." "We're not done yet, take it." Her tone left no room for argument. He reached for the yoke with trembling hands. "What are you going to do?" Alyssa unbuckled her harness. Her eyes locked on the fighter jet below, the unconscious pilot falling toward death. "I'm going to try something impossible." Evan's eyes widened in horror. "Captain, what does that mean?" Alyssa turned toward the cockpit door and said the words that made Evan's blood run cold. "I'm not going to let that pilot die alone." Then she opened the cockpit door and stepped out. Stepping out of the pilot's seat, Alyssa Hart's boots pressed against the cold metal of the cockpit floor. Every vibration of the aircraft under her feet echoed like the drumbeat of a war march. The cabin was shaking violently, the left stabilizer reporting fluctuating pressure, instruments flickering like warning flames. But for the first time since the dual-engine failure began, she felt pure focus. Evan froze, his hands gripping the yoke as though letting go would instantly trigger disaster. "Captain, what the hell are you doing?" His voice was a mix of fear and disbelief. "I need to stabilize the fighter manually," Alyssa said, her eyes never leaving the instruments, the horizon, the valley, the tumbling hornet below. "I can't let him crash uncontrolled. I need to feel it, guide it." Evan's jaw dropped. "Guide it? Are you insane? This isn't a simulation. You can't leave the controls." Her calm, unwavering stare cut through his panic. "I've done worse under pressure, trust me." The words were half truth, half steel resolve. Evan nodded shakily, still holding the yoke but letting her step fully forward. Alyssa leaned over the center console, stretching her arms as far as possible, pressing against the pedals to feel subtle shifts in airflow. She was no longer just piloting the Boeing. She was sensing the turbulence created by the fighter, attempting to manipulate the wake, to act as a stabilizing medium for two aircraft simultaneously. She had learned to fly by instinct in combat simulators during her Air Force Reserve years. But this was beyond anything she had ever imagined. A commercial airliner acting as a mid-air lifeline for a failing fighter. A scenario that would have been laughed at in debriefing rooms. Outside, the fighter jet spun closer to the valley floor. Its canopy shimmered with frost, the pilot motionless. Smoke trailed like a scar across the sky. Alyssa calculated rapidly. The jet was dropping at 2,500 feet per minute. North Star 219 was holding altitude precariously, the left stabilizer damaged, and their descent corridor narrowing by the second. She exhaled, "This is it." With a precise shift of the rudder pedals, she angled the Boeing slightly right, catching the turbulent wake of the Hornet without intersecting it directly. The commercial plane quivered as if screaming in protest, but the fighter's fall straightened marginally. She murmured a soft prayer for the unconscious pilot, a private hope carried in the hum of her own heartbeat. Passengers screamed below her, the intercom filled with cries and panic. She didn't hear them. She didn't think of them. Not yet. There was only the fighter jet and the mountain valley rushing toward them. Suddenly, the Hornet clipped the far side of a cliff, igniting a small cloud of snow and rock. Alyssa's stomach lurched. That could have been us, she thought. Evan's voice came shakily through the cockpit. "Captain, the flaps. If we extend further to stabilize, we risk tearing the wings off." Alyssa's fingers danced over the panel, flicking switches with the precision of a concert pianist. "Do it incrementally, 10 degrees first, then 15. The plane groaned under the strain. Metal screeched like tortured steel. The wings vibrated violently. Instruments rattled. The nose lifted fractionally, just enough to keep them in the valley without colliding with rising terrain. The fighter responded immediately, its spin slowing. But the pilot still hung limp inside the cockpit. Every second mattered. Suddenly, a fresh wave of turbulence slammed both aircraft. Alyssa's hands flew over the yoke, correcting minute adjustments to prevent a fatal stall. Passengers were thrown against their seats. Flight attendants hit the ceiling panels, and luggage cascaded down the aisle. Alyssa could see the fear painted across the faces of everyone on board, yet she remained a pillar of calm in a storm of chaos. "Captain, we're losing airspeed. If this continues, the aircraft will stall in 20 seconds, Evan shouted. Her jaw tightened. "Then we make the stall work for us. Angle of attack 3 degrees, rudder slight left, throttle full forward." The Boeing groaned, creaking like a ship in a violent storm. The altitude indicators ticked down. 3500, 3,200, 3,000 feet. The ground below no longer felt distant. It was imminent, unforgiving, and merciless. Alyssa's mind raced. She visualized the fighter jet as a pendulum, swinging dangerously in the valley below. She had one chance to guide it safely through the remaining corridor. A millisecond error and both aircraft would be wreckage. Her hands and feet moved in a symphony of precision, manipulating rudder, yoke, and throttle with every ounce of intuition and training she had ever accumulated. She felt the wind, the turbulence, the force dragging the fighter toward destruction. She bent the plane slightly downward to catch the fighter's unstable trajectory, then nudged it upward to correct the pull. Evan's voice cracked again. "I can't believe this is working." Alyssa didn't respond. She couldn't. Every nerve, every muscle, every fiber of her being was focused on the impossible task ahead. Then the fighter jolted violently. Its left wingtip struck a gust of wind, almost tipping it entirely sideways. Alyssa reacted instantly, banking the Boeing sharply. The entire fuselage screamed. Panels buckled. Warning lights flashed. But it worked. The Hornet leveled. Her chest heaved with relief. She dared a glance outside the cockpit. The valley floor below rushed up with terrifying speed. Tiny trees and boulders hurtled past like toys. The unconscious pilot remained in the cockpit, frozen, at the mercy of fate. Alyssa whispered to herself almost inaudibly, "Hold on, just hold on." Seconds stretched like hours. Each heartbeat was a drumbeat of destiny. One false movement and hundreds of lives would end instantly. Then a new alarm, hydraulic pressure dropping. Evan's face went pale. "Captain left stabilizer, she's failing. We can't maintain." Alyssa cut him off. "I know, I've calculated. We have one more maneuver before we're in the danger zone. One more and we either save him or fail." The fighter dipped dangerously low again, aimed toward the snow-covered valley. Alyssa adjusted the Boeing's angle to catch the turbulent wake just beneath it. Then, with a sudden calculated surge of throttle, she propelled the aircraft forward into the precise point that would act as a buffer for the falling Hornet. The fighter leveled, spinning slightly, but not enough to flip it. Alyssa let out a breath she didn't realize she had been holding. "Altitude?" she asked, voice tight. 2,000, Evan replied. "Too low," she whispered, "but the path is clear. We might just make it." The fighter's trajectory shifted slightly, no longer aimed at the valley floor or the school buildings below. Alyssa realized they were entering the critical final phase. If she timed it right, the fighter could glide out of the valley just enough to allow emergency ejection or stabilization. The valley narrowed. Sharp rock faces loomed on both sides. A sudden crosswind hit. "Evan, take a hard left 2 degrees, she instructed. "Now." The Boeing responded violently, groaning, shuddering. But the adjustment worked. The fighter followed, catching just enough of the turbulence to avoid a deadly collision with the rocks. Alyssa's stomach twisted. They were still too low. One more miscalculation could shred both aircraft. She looked at the fighter, frozen inside its cockpit, and made a decision. "I'm going to get closer," she said. "Closer?" Evan shouted. "Are you out of your mind?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were locked on the jet. She nudged the Boeing closer, closer than safety protocols ever allowed, positioning the nose to buffer the falling fighter from wind shifts, trying to stabilize it midair with the sheer mass of her own aircraft. The ground rushed up, 2,000 feet, 1,000. Alyssa's heart pounded. Sweat streaked her forehead. Every second, every fraction of an inch mattered. And then a misstep. The fighter rolled slightly, catching wind. Alyssa's stomach dropped. They were now dangerously close. She adjusted instantly, banking the Boeing. The plane groaned. The fuselage flexed under extreme strain. The fighter leveled, just barely. Alyssa exhaled slowly, the tiniest relief passing over her. Then she realized the terrifying truth. They were not out of danger. Because one final decision remained. The fighter pilot was still unconscious. They were still in the middle of a valley. And the terrain below was unforgiving. Alyssa turned to Evan. Her eyes were sharp, fierce, unflinching. "We save him now or we all die." The valley rushed up to meet them like a predator closing its jaws. Alyssa's fingers gripped the yoke until her knuckles whitened. The Boeing 737 groaned and shuddered under the strain of her impossible maneuver, the damaged stabilizer threatening at any second to throw the aircraft into a fatal stall. She didn't flinch. She couldn't. Not when 200 lives hung in the balance, and a fighter pilot, unconscious and defenseless, was trapped in a metal coffin hurtling toward the mountains. "Altitude," she demanded, her voice slicing through the chaos. 1,500, Evan replied, voice barely audible over the alarms. "We don't have much time." The fighter jet below was wobbling violently. Smoke trailed from its engines, black and thick, like a river of despair. Its spin had slowed only slightly since Alyssa's interventions, and every second the distance between it and the valley floor diminished. If the pilot didn't regain control, he would crash, and there was nothing anyone could do except what Alyssa was about to attempt. She leaned forward, chest tight with focus, eyes scanning instruments and horizon alike. She felt the wind, the turbulence, the push and pull of air against metal, and for a brief, terrifying moment, It all became a single language she could read and manipulate. "Evan," she said calmly, yet with a sharp edge that brooked no argument, "take the yoke steady 2 degrees up. Throttle full forward. I'm going in." "What do you mean, going in?" Evan asked, panic creeping into his voice. Alyssa didn't answer. Instead, she adjusted her seat slightly, bracing herself against the console. Slowly, deliberately, she leaned out, reaching toward the fighter's wake with the aircraft itself. Her plan was audacious, bordering on insane, but it was the only option. Using the Boeing's mass and trajectory, she could create a controlled airflow corridor that might allow the Hornet to stabilize enough for the pilot to regain consciousness, or at least survive the immediate fall long enough for ejection. "Hold tight," she murmured, more to herself than anyone else. "Hold tight." The Boeing lurched violently as the valley walls pressed in, the engine screaming, the fuselage groaning like it was pleading for mercy. The passenger cabin shook so hard that luggage exploded from the bins, and oxygen masks dangled over terrified faces. Alyssa ignored it all. She had a singular, impossible goal: save the fighter pilot. The Hornet wobbled, dipped, then leveled slightly. Alyssa adjusted the angle of the Boeing by fractions of a degree, banking just enough to buffer the fighter's erratic movements. It was a delicate ballet, every motion precise, every decision life or death. A slight error and both planes would be destroyed. "Captain, we're at 1,000 feet, Evan shouted. "We're too low." She didn't flinch. "We're exactly where we need to be, trust me." Evan's hands trembled on the yoke, but he followed her instructions. Outside, the fighter jet dipped again. This time, Alyssa did something that would never be taught in flight school. She angled the nose of the Boeing slightly downward, not to escape the valley, but to catch the Hornet's chaotic descent. The air roared past her face. Metal strained. Every instrument screamed. The fighter's trajectory stabilized, if only for a heartbeat. Alyssa felt a flicker of hope. She leaned further, moving with the plane as if it were an extension of her own body, adjusting throttle, rudder, and pitch simultaneously. The valley walls closed in, and the ground came rushing up. 200 lives were literally hanging in her hands. Evan gasped. "Captain, the stabilizer. If you push further, the wings could tear off." "I know," she said softly, "but we have no other choice." The Hornet lurched again. This time, Alyssa could see the pilot's fingers twitching inside the cockpit. His eyes fluttered open. Consciousness was returning, but only barely, only just in time. A tiny, desperate surge of relief washed over her, but she couldn't celebrate yet. They were still in the danger zone. The valley floor was only 800 feet below. Trees, rocks, and icy rivers rushed past at lethal speed. "Altitude?" she asked. 700, Evan said, almost whispering. Alyssa's heart skipped. This was it. No more room for error. One wrong maneuver and everything would be over. "Hornet pilot awake?" she asked, speaking aloud more as a ritual, a command to fate itself than to anyone else. The fighter's canopy shimmered. A hand lifted slightly. The pilot blinked. He was alive, conscious, but not yet capable of controlling the jet fully. Alyssa adjusted again, angling the Boeing to create just enough pressure and lift in the turbulent corridor beneath the Hornet. Her mind moved faster than any algorithm, calculating trajectory, speed, altitude, wind, and reaction time. "Throttle forward," she shouted. "Bank left 2 degrees, rudder slight right." The Boeing obeyed like a living extension of her body. The fighter, responding to the airflow she manipulated, leveled slightly. "Altitude 500, Evan yelled. The valley was almost upon them. Rocks and trees blurred past the windows. She could see the tiny shapes of wildlife scattering below, oblivious to the chaos above. The Hornet dipped once more, dangerously. Alyssa knew this was the final descent. If she didn't stabilize it completely in the next few seconds, the fighter pilot would crash, and North Star 219 would be trapped in a collision corridor. Her hands flew over the controls almost instinctually. She was no longer thinking. she was feeling. The airflow, the turbulence, the pull of gravity, all became a single line she could manipulate. She nudged the Boeing slightly closer, dangerously close to the fighter. Her stomach lurched as the fuselage groaned under extreme stress. Every panel screamed. The left stabilizer threatened failure, but the Hornet, miraculously, responded. The pilot's hands gripped the controls. He was awake, alert, alive. "Evan," Alyssa said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline, "we stabilize him. He's going to make it. Just keep us steady." The Boeing shook violently, but Evan followed her instructions. Outside, the Hornet's spin slowed further, its nose leveling as the pilot regained partial control. Alyssa's chest tightened with tension and relief. It was not over yet, but the impossible was within reach. Then a sudden, violent shock. A gust of turbulent wind struck the left wing. The damaged stabilizer threatened to fail completely. Alyssa's stomach dropped. "Hold," she shouted, "hold for me." Evan gritted his teeth, his hands shaking on the yoke. The plane groaned, the cabin shuddered, oxygen masks swung wildly, passengers screamed. Alyssa felt the sweat running down her temple. She pushed the Boeing into the precise angle, using her weight, instincts, and the sheer force of will. The aircraft groaned violently, threatening to tear apart. And then a miracle. The fighter leveled completely. The pilot regained full control, maneuvering just enough to avoid the valley floor. Alyssa exhaled slowly. For the first time in minutes, she allowed herself a flicker of hope. But the valley was not yet clear. North Star 219 was still dangerously low, wings groaning under extreme strain, damage threatening stability. She turned to Evan, eyes fierce and unrelenting. "This isn't over. We have to climb now. Maximum power, maximum climb. Pull up carefully." Evan nodded, trembling, and began the climb. The ground rushed past below. The Hornet, now fully in control, followed the corridor Alyssa had carved with the Boeing. The last ridge approached, jagged and unforgiving. Alyssa felt the tension in her bones, the weight of hundreds of lives pressing down on her. And then, just as the aircraft crested the ridge, an explosion of sound and force. The left stabilizer finally gave a violent shudder, but the Boeing held together. Outside, the fighter jet cleared the valley floor, its pilot upright, conscious, alive. Alyssa's hands shook as she gripped the yoke. Her legs trembled. Her pulse pounded like a war drum. Evan looked at her, eyes wide with awe and terror. "Captain, we did it. He's alive." Alyssa allowed herself a single breath, but she didn't relax. Not yet, because the climb wasn't over. The airspace above was still treacherous, the Boeing damaged, the valley behind them filled with potential debris. She looked out the cockpit window. The sun glinted off snow-covered peaks. Trees whistled past. The fighter jet followed, steady now but still vulnerable. And then, as if the universe demanded one final test, a shadow crossed the sun. Another A-18 appeared. Not damaged, not out of control, but fast, sleek, deadly. The Hornet's wingman had arrived on the scene. Alyssa's stomach clenched. They weren't out of danger. Not yet. The shadow of the second F-A-18 fell over the cockpit like an omen. Alyssa Hart's jaw tightened, her hands gripping the yoke as though it were the only anchor in a universe gone mad. The fighter jet sliced through the sky with terrifying speed, its sleek fuselage glinting in the sun. This was no malfunctioning aircraft. This was combat-ready precision, a predator evaluating two planes that had already defied death once. Evan's voice broke through the cockpit's tension. "Captain, that's a military interceptor. They're here maybe to assess the situation, but they're moving fast." Alyssa didn't answer immediately. Her eyes tracked both the falling fighter they had just saved and the incoming jet. She understood instinctively that the Hornet pilot below was still disoriented. One wrong maneuver from the wingman could end in catastrophe. "Evan," she said finally, voice cold and controlled, "we're not giving them a chance to interfere. Keep the nose up, steady climb. maximum climb. Evan's hands shook as he followed her commands. The Boeing responded sluggishly, the engine screaming, the airframe groaning. The left stabilizer flexed alarmingly under the strain, but Alyssa knew that if they didn't climb now, gravity and the second jet could spell disaster. The valley below fell away. Snow-dusted peaks and jagged cliffs blurred past like streaks of light. She kept the Boeing angled carefully, controlling every microsecond of lift, every pulse of air, every fraction of a degree. "Altitude," she demanded. 2,500, Evan said, trembling, still climbing slowly. Alyssa's eyes flicked to the fighter they had saved. The pilot, now fully conscious, was maneuvering cautiously, following the escape corridor Alyssa had carved. She knew he could stabilize, but he couldn't accelerate fast enough to outpace the wingman without guidance. She spoke over the radio, her tone commanding. "Bravo 1, this is North Star 219. Follow our path, keep it steady. Trust our lift, do not attempt sharp turns. You'll clear the ridge in 15 seconds. A subtle twitch from the Hornet's wings told her he had understood. She exhaled silently. Time was still short. The interceptor above adjusted its trajectory. Alyssa couldn't read its intent yet. It could be there to assist, or it could miscalculate and clip one of the planes below. "Captain, what do we do?" Evan whispered, hands shaking. Alyssa leaned closer, scanning the altimeter, the horizon, the position of every aircraft. "We climb fast and we create separation. Follow the ridge line. Trust the Boeing's momentum." Evan nodded. He was terrified, but he obeyed. The engines roared louder, forcing air through the fuselage like the roar of a beast. The plane lurched violently, groaning, threatening to break apart. Alyssa ignored it. She had survived worse, and she knew this was possible. The fighter followed, dipping dangerously low in turbulent air, but Alyssa's precise manipulation of the Boeing's wake kept it steady. The Hornet pilot was now conscious, alert, and recovering confidence. The shadow of the wingman loomed closer. Alyssa's pulse quickened. The Boeing was damaged. Their speed and climb capability were limited. A misjudgment now would spell disaster. "Evan, bank left 2 degrees. Rudder slight right," she commanded. The plane groaned, but it obeyed. Outside, the Hornet's nose leveled, rising slowly along the corridor of wind Alyssa had created. The ridge approached, sharp, jagged, unforgiving. The ground below was a fractured canvas of white and dark green. Alyssa felt the fear, the adrenaline, the weight of responsibility pressing down like a physical force. 200 passengers, a saved fighter pilot, a damaged Boeing, and now another military aircraft closing in. "Altitude," she demanded again. 4,000, Evan yelled, sweat dripping down his face. The ridge came closer. Alyssa adjusted the pitch, forcing the Boeing into a precise climb. The fuselage screamed, metal bending slightly under pressure. Panels rattled violently. The plane's very structure was protesting the impossible maneuver. Then relief. The Hornet cleared the first ridge, guided perfectly by Alyssa's corridor of air. The pilot's hand steadied. He was safe. But safety was temporary. The wingman above was closing fast. Its sleek engines were designed for acceleration and agility. It was likely assessing the situation, testing the limits of North Star 219 and the Hornet they had just saved. Alyssa leaned forward, eyes scanning every instrument. "Evan, follow me. Maximum climb. We maintain distance and altitude. Don't overreact. Smooth ascent." One mistake and she didn't finish. He understood. The Boeing climbed violently, wings flexing under pressure. Every second the ground fell further away, the valley opening beneath them like a jagged maw. Passengers screamed, flight attendants shouted over the intercom, oxygen masks swayed, luggage tumbled. But Alyssa remained the pillar of calm, the eye of the storm. The Hornet followed, matching their ascent, now fully stable. Alyssa whispered to herself, "Come on, hold together." The wingman adjusted its position, circling above them. Alyssa recognized the military precision in its movements. It wasn't attacking, but it was testing. Every instinct in her body screamed that they were still under threat. Evan's hands shook. "Captain, are we going to make it?" Alyssa didn't answer immediately. Her eyes flicked between the instruments, the Hornet and the wingman. Then she nodded. "Yes, but we climb fast, clear the ridge completely. Then we reassess." The Boeing's engines roared at maximum throttle. The fuselage strained, wings flexing dangerously, but the plane obeyed. Slowly, agonizingly, they gained separation from the ridge. Below, the valley disappeared behind a wall of mountains. Ahead, the sky opened, sunlight flooding their path. The Hornet flew steadily beside them, finally fully in control. Alyssa allowed herself a fleeting glance at the pilot in the Hornet cockpit. He gave a subtle nod. Gratitude and relief mingled in his gesture. But the danger wasn't over. The wingman circled above, still evaluating, still capable of misjudgment. Alyssa's mind raced. How would she communicate that they were allies, that they had saved the pilot, that they weren't a threat? Her hands moved almost automatically, adjusting throttle, rudder, pitch, every movement calculated to project stability and control. She had to keep the wingman from interfering while maintaining the Boeing's integrity. "Altitude?" she asked, voice calm but intense. 7,000, Evan said, clearing the ridge now. Alyssa exhaled, the first real breath of relief she had allowed herself in minutes. The Boeing leveled, wings straining, fuselage groaning, instruments warning, but they had survived the valley. The Hornet pilot flew beside them, steady, confident, alive, safe. Alyssa allowed herself a small, private smile. For a moment, the impossible had been achieved. Then the radio crackled. ATC, their voices urgent, filled with panic and awe. "North Star 219, what the hell just happened? We were tracking you 2 minutes from impact. Confirm all aboard are safe." Alyssa's jaw tightened. "All aboard are safe, pilot rescued. We are climbing to safe altitude. Proceed with emergency landing protocol." The radio went silent for a moment, then a murmur of disbelief. "Captain, we can't even, this is incredible." Alyssa exhaled slowly, glancing at Evan. His face was pale, shaken, but alive. They had made it through the impossible. But she didn't relax completely. The wingman still circled above. The Boeing was damaged. The valley was behind them, but the flight was far from over. And somewhere deep in her gut, she knew the sky would not forgive mistakes. Not now, not ever. She adjusted the plane slightly, preparing for the next phase of the flight, bringing everyone home safely. But in the back of her mind, one question remained. Would North Star 219 survive the rest of the journey, or was the danger only beginning? The sky opened above them like a fragile promise, sunlight glinting off the wings of North Star 219 and the Hornet beside it. Alyssa Hart finally allowed herself a heartbeat of relief, but she knew the reprieve was temporary. The Boeing's fuselage groaned, panels rattling, the left stabilizer damaged and unpredictable. The Hornet pilot had regained consciousness, but his movements were cautious, testing his aircraft, steadying it after the deadly turbulence. Evan's voice broke the brief silence. "Captain, are we actually going to make it back? The plane, it's damaged. The wings are flexing like we're overloading them." Alyssa tightened her jaw. "We don't have a choice. One step at a time, keep climbing to safe altitude. Once we clear the turbulence, we assess and prepare for landing." The valley was behind them, but the ridge line ahead was unforgiving. She could see jagged cliffs rising, each one sharp enough to shear the plane in an instant if they misjudged the ascent. The Hornet's pilot was following, trusting the corridor of stability Alyssa had carved through air, but she couldn't risk letting him maneuver independently until they cleared this critical zone. Evan's hands were white on the yoke, every knuckle a testament to the terror and adrenaline coursing through him. "Captain, we're at 8,000 feet. The wingman is still circling. Should we try to communicate? Alyssa shook her head. Not yet, let him watch. Let him see the Hornet is safe. Any miscommunication could be fatal. The Boeing's engines roared at maximum throttle, wings flexing under stress. Each vibration was a warning. The aircraft was at its limit. The next few minutes would determine whether they would survive or become another headline of catastrophe. The Hornet adjusted beside them, gaining altitude cautiously. Alyssa could see the pilot inside, steadying himself, glancing at his instruments, gripping the stick with renewed confidence. He was alive. That knowledge, while relieving, added to her burden. She had to get everyone home. She had to finish what she started. Evan spoke again, voice tight with fear. "Captain, emergency protocols for landing. Should we prep now?" She nodded. "Not yet. First, clear the mountain corridor completely. Then we adjust. Remember, every movement gentle, every adjustment measured. No sudden maneuvers. We can't afford panic in the cabin or structural failure." The ridge approached faster than she expected. Alyssa adjusted the pitch carefully, angling the nose upward to clear the highest peaks while maintaining speed. The left stabilizer groaned violently under the strain, the instrument panel flickering with warnings. "Altitude 9,500, Evan shouted. Alyssa glanced at the altimeter and then at the Hornet. They were almost clear of the valley's treacherous corridor, but the wingman above remained in position, still observing, still evaluating. She could feel the tension radiating from the jet. She knew that a single misstep could escalate into a deadly collision. Her eyes flicked to the passengers behind her. She couldn't see their faces, but she felt the fear, the panic, the raw terror transmitted through the vibrations of the cabin and the screams echoing faintly through the intercom. Flight attendants were strapped into jump seats, holding on wide-eyed as the plane shuddered. Alyssa's resolve hardened. They would survive. She would make them survive. The Boeing crested the final ridge. The valley fell away, replaced by open sky. Alyssa allowed a fleeting breath of relief, but it was short-lived. "Evan," she said, voice firm, "prepare for descent. Controlled, gentle, follow my lead. We have to get everyone on the ground safely, and the plane won't forgive mistakes." Evan nodded, hands trembling but responsive. The Boeing began a careful descent, engines throttled back slightly to stabilize speed. Outside, the Hornet descended in parallel, wings steady, engines responding to Alyssa's calculated airflow manipulation. But the danger wasn't over. North Star 219 was damaged, carrying the cumulative strain of near-impossible maneuvers. Any sudden turbulence could tear the wings apart. The passengers were still terrified, and the valley below, though no longer immediate, loomed as a reminder of the stakes. Suddenly, a crack of static on the radio. ATC. North Star 219, emergency landing clearance. Repeat, emergency landing clearance at North Ridge Airport. You are cleared, proceed with caution. All emergency crews are standing by. Alyssa exhaled slowly. The instructions were clear, but the real challenge was only beginning. She had to bring a damaged plane, with 200 passengers and a now fully conscious fighter pilot in the sky, safely to a landing strip. "Evan," she said, "follow my descent pattern, keep the yoke steady. Avoid any sudden corrections. We land this plane intact." Evan's hands shook. "Captain, I don't know if I can do this." "You can," she said sharply but calmly. "Trust me, trust yourself, trust the plane." The Boeing descended, engines straining against gravity and the weight of near-constant maneuvers. Alyssa's eyes scanned the terrain ahead. The runway at North Ridge Airport was visible, glinting in the distance. Emergency crews were already in position. Every step of this descent had to be precise. Too fast, and the plane could skid or break apart. Too slow, and they risked overshooting the runway. Passengers below had started to quiet, sensing the relative stability, but many were still wide-eyed, gripping armrests. Flight attendants were issuing calm instructions, though even they were tense. Alyssa focused on them briefly, reminded herself that their survival depended on her. "Altitude 3,000 feet, Evan said. "Keep steady," Alyssa said. "We're almost there." The Hornet followed along, now fully under its pilot's control, maneuvering carefully beside them, a silent testament to the impossible rescue. Suddenly, a flash of light reflected in the cockpit. Alyssa's heart skipped. Another jet. No, just the sun catching a ridge, but in that instant her pulse jumped. She couldn't allow even a single moment of distraction. "Runway in sight," she said. "Prepare for final approach. Flap slowly to 30 degrees. Engine steady. Smooth descent. Gentle touchdown." Evan followed her instructions meticulously. The plane descended gracefully, wings flexing under stress, metal screaming quietly in protest. The Hornet maintained position, now slightly above and to the side. "Altitude 500 feet, Evan said. "Good, slower. Touchdown in 300, 200. Alyssa guided the plane with every ounce of her skill, every micro-adjustment. Outside, the runway rushed up, emergency crews tense but ready. Then the inevitable test. Turbulence hit unexpectedly, a sudden gust that threw the Boeing violently. Alyssa's hands flew over the yoke, rudder, and throttle. The fuselage groaned, the left stabilizer wavered. The plane bucked, passengers screamed. Hold it," she shouted. Evan gritted his teeth, following her lead, adjustments precise, measured. The runway grew closer, all of it rushing toward them at terrifying speed. The Boeing's wheels touched down, tentatively, violently, yet intact. The landing gear shuddered under the strain but held. Tires screamed against the tarmac. Alyssa eased the plane to a stop, engines throttled back, wings quivering but alive. Silence fell in the cockpit, heavy with disbelief and relief. Evan exhaled shakily. "Captain, we made it." Alyssa didn't speak immediately. She looked outside at the Hornet slowing beside them, at the emergency crews rushing forward, at the terrified but alive passengers. She allowed herself one fleeting, victorious breath. But deep down, she knew the world would never forget this flight, not for its turbulence, not for its danger, but for the impossible, heart-stopping rescue she had executed. The tires of North Star 219 screamed against the tarmac, but gradually the aircraft slowed, shuddering under the weight of 200 lives, a damaged fuselage, and a heart that had never stopped racing. Alyssa Hart's hands rested lightly on the yoke, though her knuckles remained white. Every muscle ached, every nerve still thrumming with adrenaline. The impossible had been done, yet the reality of what she just survived hadn't fully registered. The Hornet touched down gracefully a few seconds later, its pilot rolling to a stop beside them. He removed his helmet, revealing a face pale but alive, eyes wide with awe and gratitude. He took a deep, shaky breath and saluted Alyssa through the windshield. Alyssa returned the salute, her own gesture quiet, understated, but filled with the weight of 1,000 emotions: relief, exhaustion, pride, and disbelief. Emergency crews rushed toward the Boeing, assisting passengers, helping the flight attendants usher everyone safely out of the cabin. The air outside was frigid, crisp, but it didn't matter. Every scream of terror had turned to whispers of relief. Some passengers hugged one another, some collapsed to their knees, weeping. Others stood stunned, unable to process the fact that they had survived something that should have been fatal. Evan exhaled, finally allowing his shoulders to relax. He turned to Alyssa, voice barely above a whisper. "Captain, I can't believe you just did that. How did you?" Alyssa looked out the cockpit, her gaze following the Hornet pilot as he secured his aircraft. Then she turned back to Evan. "We did it together. I guided, you followed. That's all that mattered. Everyone's alive. That's the only part that counts." Evan shook his head, eyes glistening. "Alive and unthinkable, I can't even, that was impossible." Alyssa allowed herself the smallest smile. Impossible doesn't mean it didn't happen. It only means someone had to make it happen. The rescued fighter pilot climbed down from his jet, still shaking. Alyssa stepped out of the cockpit, her flight suit streaked with sweat, hair disheveled, face pale but resolute. He ran toward her, eyes wide, and stopped a few feet away. "Thank you," he said, voice thick with emotion. I don't know how to thank you. I owe my life to you." Alyssa shook her head. "You'll thank the flight attendants, you'll thank Evan, you'll thank the passengers, you'll thank yourself for holding on." He nodded, but the raw emotion in his eyes spoke louder than words. Then, in a gesture that would stay with Alyssa forever, he saluted her again. This time it wasn't a formality, it was reverence. The emergency crews began escorting passengers from the cabin, and reporters and cameras started arriving. News helicopters hovered above the airfield, capturing live footage. North Star 219's passengers exited one by one, some shaking, some crying, all alive. Cell phones were raised, videos streamed, social media lit up within seconds. The story was already spreading, how a quiet, brilliant pilot had defied death itself to save hundreds. Alyssa watched silently as passengers hugged, cried, whispered thanks to her and her crew. She didn't seek attention, didn't look for accolades. Her job had always been to protect lives, and she had. That was enough. But even as the adrenaline ebbed, the weight of the day returned. The Boeing had taken incredible strain. The left stabilizer was damaged. The fuselage had suffered stress beyond anything even the engineers had prepared for. Every panel, every system, every bolt had been pushed to the limit. A senior maintenance officer approached, clipboard in hand, eyes wide. "Captain Hart, we need to inspect the aircraft immediately. The wings, the fuselage, I've never seen anything like." Alyssa nodded, barely listening. She was already thinking ahead, replaying every moment of the flight in her mind. The turbulence, the dual-engine failure, the fighter pilot's unconscious body, every decision she had made, every maneuver executed flawlessly under impossible pressure. The Hornet pilot approached again. "You saved my life," he said quietly. "And I don't just mean me, you saved all of them. Everyone on that plane owes you. America owes you." Alyssa's jaw tightened. She didn't speak immediately. Gratitude wasn't why she had done it, but hearing it still hit her in ways she hadn't anticipated. Her entire career had been about skill, precision, and control, but this moment was different. This moment was raw, human, and terrifyingly real. A reporter finally approached, microphone in hand. "Captain Hart, can you tell us how you managed to?" She held up a hand, stopping him. "I don't want to talk about it," she said firmly. "All I know is that 200 people are alive. That's all that matters." But cameras kept rolling. Phones kept filming. News outlets were already broadcasting the miraculous story. The quiet pilot who had taken control of a dead plane, guided a fighter pilot through near-certain death, and landed everyone safely. Within hours, her name would be everywhere, praising, scrutinizing, admiring, and wondering how a human being could do the impossible. Alyssa didn't care. Not yet. She needed to see her crew, check on passengers, and process what had just happened. The adrenaline still burned in her veins, the echoes of near-death still lingering. She walked through the cabin once more, meeting the eyes of passengers who stared at her with awe and gratitude. A young child held a stuffed animal tightly, whispering thank you through tears. An elderly man grasped her hands, trembling. A mother clutched her children close, whispering prayers of thanks. For the first time, Alyssa allowed herself to feel the enormity of what she had accomplished. It wasn't glory or recognition, it was pure human connection. She had faced death head-on and emerged with everyone alive. That was her reward. Evan approached her, voice hushed. "Captain, do you even realize what we just did?" She shook her head, still processing. "I realize we survived, and we saved a life that shouldn't have been saved. That's enough for now." The Hornet pilot approached one final time. "You've got a hero's heart, Captain, but heroes don't just survive, they inspire. And today, you've inspired an entire nation." Alyssa looked out at the airfield, at the emergency crews, at the passengers streaming into the arms of their loved ones, and finally allowed herself a small, private smile. "Then let them be inspired," she whispered. A few minutes later, the wingman A-18 pilot saluted her from a distance and took off, vanishing into the blue sky. The Hornet followed. The sky, once a theater of chaos, returned to its serene vastness. Alyssa Hart stood on the tarmac, silent, breathing in the cold air, her heart still racing. She didn't hear the cheers, the cameras, or the shouting reporters. She only felt the weight of what had been accomplished, and the humbling truth: one person's courage, skill, and determination could make the impossible real. And somewhere in the chaos and the trembling relief of 200 survivors, she realized, heroism isn't about recognition. It's about action. And today, she had acted when it counted most. The story would spread. The world would talk. But Alyssa, the quiet girl pilot, simply walked away from the chaos she had navigated, carrying a heart heavy with relief, gratitude, and the silent knowledge that she had faced death and won, not just for herself, but for everyone who had trusted her with their lives. And in the quiet moments that followed, with the sun setting behind the mountains, one thought echoed in her mind. Never underestimate what a single person can do when there's nothing left to lose. The end.